Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I am your co-host, Thomas Vick, joined by the other co-host, Seth Wilson. Seth, how are you today?
Thomas, I'm doing great, although it's been a little cold around here recently, and I never thought a 20-degree swing would feel so good going from 0 to 20 degrees,
It's
but that's where we find ourselves.
quite balmy today at 20 degrees and some flurries down here in Greenwood. Yeah, it has been very, very cold. This past Monday was Martin Luther King Day, and so we had that holiday. My office was closed for Martin Luther King Day, and also the inauguration was on Monday, and the national championship for football was on Monday. So a lot of things were happening on Monday, January 20th, 2025. And then Tuesday, we were in the middle of the cold still, and my child's school was canceled. And then, I think we went to drop her off at school yesterday, and there wasn't any heat at the school. So there was no school to be had. Had kind of a crazy schedule this week, but yeah, I'm glad that it is 20 degrees outside this morning.
Well, that's such a great segue, actually, for what was kind of on my mind to talk about this week, because in the midst of all of the changes in both seen circumstances and unforeseen circumstances, how do you keep track of everything that you need as you run your office? And so that is so true, especially like with me. I have staff members that I rely on, but they also have families, and sometimes they have sicknesses that they have to deal with. And so when you're thinking about how do you make sure that all the information is available to everyone to make sure that the clients are getting served, that's one of those things that you don't often think about when you're getting started, maybe in a practice, but certainly as you've developed a little bit of a practice, something you have to have thought out and a good plan for.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's one of the topics we want to talk about today is, law practice management programs, software, just client relationship management programs that you can use. And I want to have some kind of discussion with you about that. We also wanted to talk about this topic, equipment for a law office, and what software should you have in a law office as you are getting started. Maybe somebody who has never opened up a law practice before, never hung your own shingle. They're looking for advice as to how do I do this? And one of the first questions is, well, what stuff do I need? And so I'll just kind of open up that topic to you, Seth. If somebody's opening up their own law practice, what do they need bare bones to get started?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the first obvious thing is you're going to have some sort of computer. In today's world, the thing starts and ends with a computer and probably a phone. Now, most of us have kind of grown up in that era nowadays with both a cell phone of some kind, likely a smartphone, and some sort of computer that we have access to. But those, I would say, are two essential things to having a practice. And once you have the computer, and there's so many resources on what's a good computer and those kind of things, I think the challenge is you can often go down a rabbit hole of trying to find the perfect piece of equipment or the perfect software tool instead of just getting started and kind of figuring out then what works well for your practice. So in general terms, you need some way to communicate with your client by phone, because folks, especially in the estate planning arena, like that personal touch, and it's very helpful to have the phone as a tool at your disposal, and a computer to actually do some of the work that you're going to do, right? You're going to need software like a word processor. The court system in Indiana uses Microsoft Word by default. That's readily available to most folks through Microsoft's Office 365 platform, which also can provide your email and Outlook and contact management and some of those things. And so to me, those are sort of the essentials, and kind of one of the recommendations that I would make if you're thinking about starting out is looking into Microsoft's Office 365 platform, or whatever the current branding of that software is, seems to change from time to time. because that covers the basics in terms of your Microsoft Word access. And it even has its own version of file sharing and storage through SharePoint, which is or OneDrive, I think it's called. And that can be a very helpful tool. It's not a true backup system for files, but it would give you the ability to have files available on the cloud and locally that way, so that if your computer does crash for some reason and you don't have a backup of that, you can get to the website and get a downloaded copy of it again. So those are kind of the essentials. When you started out, Thomas, kind of what did you have available to you?
Well, I don't think we're going to quite get to it, but I started out with Clio, so we'll kind of table that for now. But I got Office 365 pretty much immediately. I bought my website. At the time, it was thomasvicklaw.org. Now it's vicklaw.org. But I bought that website, and then through Office 365, I was able to get my own email address that was attached to that website, and so that was great because I felt like I'm a pretty credible attorney. I've got an email handle that you know goes right along with my website. It's pretty good. And Office 365 was not very expensive. No, even now, I don't think it's more than $20 a month for some level of the subscription. It may be a little bit less than that, actually. So Office 365 is a great tool. I use Outlook for my email needs. Outlook comes, along with that package with Office 365. Use that. As far as like equipment that I used, I started out with my laptop from law school and used that for quite a while. Uh, I don't know, maybe a couple of years, maybe 3 years before I ended up going to a Windows Surface so that I could have the two-in-one tablet capabilities. So I had that computer, and I actually had an office space where the phone was included, so I didn't have to pay any money for the particular phone number. An office number was provided to me through the office lease that has since changed, but that's what I did for my phone needs. And then as far as a printer was concerned, I started out with an HP 8630 to be able to scan, print, copy, and it worked out pretty well. I don't know that I want to go into great detail about HP Smart at this time, which I haven't been as pleased with. I've moved on to a different scanning and copying program called NAPS2, NAPS, and then the number 2. And that seems to work a lot better than HP Smart. But those were some of my basic equipment needs that I used at the very beginning of opening the law practice, and that seemed to work out pretty well for me. You don't need much. One of the great things about opening up a law practice is all you really need is a computer and a phone and maybe some kind of printer, and you can start a law practice and get going. And that's the beauty of it. There's not a whole lot of investment that needs to be done up front.
Yeah, and a great point about printers. Printers are one of my least favorite pieces of technology because I
Amen.
don't get along with them very well. And so I don't often talk about them. But obviously, that's a very important part of an estate planning practice because original documents need original signatures on paper. So there is that component of taking what was created digitally and then turning it into a physical, tangible thing that gets signed by a client. And then in today's electronic world, we have to then redigitize that back to have that electronic copy. And so the scanning piece has become very important. And if you ever look at what is the best scanner for a law office, you will likely come across Fujitsu's ScanSnap tool, and there's lots of available resource on that. That's a great scanning tool. It's a dedicated sheet-fed scanner and can scan very quickly and does a very good job of, and longevity wise works for a long time without having any issues. So those are very popular choices for folks as they're thinking about that. And then just a laser printer. Like we use some Brother printers around here for kind of the day-to-day printing. We have a bigger copier for some of our bigger jobs that we have used as well. They're printers, so you got to deal with them. They're going to jam, they're going to have problems, and they're going to need ongoing repair and maintenance to keep them happy and moving. So you just kind of have to deal with that as part of the administration of your practice for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those are some good pointers on what you need to start a law practice from a technology standpoint. Let's kind of talk about, instead of equipment, though, programs. There are a whole host of law practice management programs, client relationship management programs, and a lot of ways that you can do some marketing with these programs. Or maybe you might have a client relationship management program, but then you need some other kind of e-newsletter subscription. All kinds of different avenues that you can do to get started. So again, open up the question to you: what software does a beginning solo practitioner need?
Great segue there. And one thing we should mention is these are sort of general advice tools, right? Or tips that we're giving. Any tool that you use, you need to make sure you understand the sort of data security and client information security issues that may arise around those particular tools. And if you have an older computer, make sure that it's getting up to date and it has malware and antivirus and that kind of stuff. If you're on the Windows side, firewalls and all that fun stuff. So we won't talk about all that in more detail today, but that is definitely a part of the consideration, is making sure that you can maintain that client information securely through whatever equipment that you're using. Same goes for software, because there's a bunch of different options out there, which is one of the cool things about the time in which we practice. There's so many great tools available for lawyers today to help manage the practice. And I think the big thing to think about is, how do you want things to work, and how are you comfortable capturing information and keeping it moving through the system so something doesn't fall through the cracks and create a malpractice problem for you down the road. And so that's where these tools, and how I think about them in terms of how are we going to manage the client relationship from the time I first get connected to the client, be that through a phone call, an email, a website inquiry, a face-to-face meeting, a text message. I mean, there's so many different inputs now that we get client connections with. What's the next thing to get that into some sort of system? So a lot of times you may just start out with some sort of list in a Word document, for example, of those clients and the necessary information about that. You may put that into a spreadsheet and put some more tracking mechanism in there of where are they in the process. Or you may get into a larger dedicated software platform like a Clio Grow, for example, which is a case and customer relationship management tool for managing leads and those kind of things, or a CRM of some kind like Salesforce or what have you. So many different options out there. I think the big key is to kind of understand how you best work, and something that you will actually use and rely on and trust to review and keep it moving through that process. Then you can decide kind of what are the cool features that you can do with that in terms of that marketing perspective and case management perspective. So our office uses Clio Grow on the front end of a case to track folks who come in contact with us, so that we can make sure that we're following up with them. If for some reason they need a little bit more time to make a decision before they're going to retain the office, we want to make sure we're tracking that. And then if they don't choose to move forward with us, we want to make sure that we disengage with that client appropriately. So there's not a lack of clarity of, are we still responsible? Do you still have questions or what have you? So we always want to make sure that we're doing that correctly. And then we also utilize Clio's case management software, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a future episode once the case actually moves into that part of the process.
Yeah, a spreadsheet is great because it's a list, and you can, as you talk to somebody on the phone, you can say, okay, I need to do this now. Now I need to draft the will, and you could say that's my assignment. And then you might even have another column in the spreadsheet that says, okay, I started it, but I didn't finish it. I need to follow up with the client. And if you've got, 5 to 10 of those cases, then maybe that's going to be workable for you, and you don't need to go the route of having a CRM program. But as soon as you're above 10 and you can't get all your work done in a single day that you have, then you need to start getting a system in place. And that's what you've alluded to, having a system in place. And as much as possible, I try to make that system a closed system. Like if you contact me, it has to come through one of my systems, and that's a phone call to my office, that's an email to me, that's a website hit, or even booking a call through my website. Those are the ways that people get in touch with me. And in most of those circumstances, I've gotten automation within my CRM, which is Lawmatics, that will automatically add them into my system. And then I know that they're there. I have their contact information, and then depending on what kind of case, then I've got certain things that come after that. But the main thing is securing the contact information and getting a sense of what type of case it is. One of my biggest nightmares is when somebody just catches me after church and says, "Hey, I've got this problem and I need you to help me out with it." And I might have a brief conversation with them, but usually I say, call my office so that I can get you on the calendar, because between walking from this conversation to my car, there's a high likelihood that I'm going to forget and things are going to get dropped. So, that's somewhat of an inconvenience to the person I'm talking to, but it's really done with the best of intentions because I don't want things to get left undone that need to get finished. So Lawmatics is my CRM. There's a ton of functionality to that. Definitely a competitor with Clio Grow. I moved from Clio Grow to Lawmatics, and I think the beauty of Clio Grow is the simplicity of it. You know exactly. I guess there's no extraneous information. Lawmatics, you can kind of get lost in some of the functionality that it offers, and it can get kind of confusing. And the reporting of the cases and case types and sources, is all of that information is better reported in Clio Grow, in my opinion, than Lawmatics. But that's what I do. One of the things that I liked about Lawmatics over Clio Grow was the email campaigns that I could do. Clio Grow has email campaign capability, but it's not quite as robust, at least when I was using Clio Grow, as Lawmatics. That's kind of how I switched over from Clio Grow to Lawmatics.
Yeah, and I think you hit on an important point there, is the potential for automation and what works well. Who do you have helping you at this point? Does the computer sort of become an assistant for you, and being able to automate those processes so they happen consistently because you're the one who set them up, or you knew very closely and you're the one monitoring them? That can be a real benefit for you as you're getting started. So you're spending less time on the administrative portions of the practice and more time on the client facing projects. So that's one of my go-to taglines, is automate, don't administrate if you can help it. But you also have to recognize that these are tools and these are habits that you as the attorney are building in. So your example of someone you talk to after church is a great one, because if you know that every time you have that situation, you do this response, that's very consistent for you to share with someone who says, well, why didn't you call me? Well, my habit is, right? And all lawyers remember evidence class, and you can introduce evidence of your habit and character to show that most of the time you would do this kind of thing versus something else. And so we do that systematically throughout the office each time we do something, to the best we can, to try to not miss something. That's why we do it that way. It helps us practice that repetition over and over. And if you can start establishing some of those little routines for yourself, like your example, super helpful, keeps it from, again, that nightmare situation where I feel so bad because I was supposed to call you back And sometimes you have to make those calls and just say, "Hey, it was my fault. I dropped the ball. I'm sorry." And that does happen, but the idea is you're building the tools and the solutions around your practice to limit those kind of calls.
Yeah, yeah. And as you're building a lot of these CRMs, they don't necessarily have the automations built into them. So you're starting from the ground floor, but as you continue in your practice, you're going to add one automation and then you're going to add a step in that automation. And that might be like a 3 or 4 step automation. And then you'll think, well, I've been doing this action over and over again. I've done this like 5 or 6 times in a row, and it's the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to build in an automation so that I don't have to go through this thought process like I did the last 5 or 6 times. And it kind of gets into your head, oh, I can do that. And then you build another automation for it and or another template. And then you just build these forms, and they're great because they're the ones that you made. They make sense to you. And then as your practice is growing, then you can plug in a paralegal or an assistant and say, okay, this is what the automation does. Run the automation, fill in the information that you need for that, and it frees up your time to be able to meet with other clients or to do networking, all those other things that you got to do in building up a law practice. And so the automation capability of these programs, whether it's Clio Grow, Lawmatics, there are several others that we could go through that we may not be as familiar with. All of them are great and just really help you in establishing a law practice and then growing it.
Yeah, and one suggestion there that you kind of hit on is the idea of these checklists. And so going back to kind of an Excel spreadsheet example, one of the things I like to do is when I get a document in or an email or something, I just kind of sit down with that the first time I do it and go, what are the steps from the beginning of this to the end of it? And I just write them down and I kind of break them up into their discrete parts. And then the cool thing with spreadsheets and things is you can kind of group them under, hey, this is a project, and then these are the steps related to that project, or whatever context makes sense. Or you can order them in a certain way. Or what I like to do, if you want to take it to the extreme and be super kind of nerdy with it, you can go and assign an estimated time that that takes. So that when I assign myself this project list, I know that's a half an hour project, that's an hour project, and I can kind of figure out based on where that goes. Then if I want to assign it to staff, I can say, well, I've done this project and I've assigned you 50 of these this year because we had 50 of those cases. That's going to take up that much of that staff member's time on an annual basis. I really can't assign them more because I've already filled them up over here. And so as you build it, it really becomes more powerful as a overall practice management tool, because now you're starting to see, whoa, over the past 3 years, we've done this many cases. And I do that every time on and you kind of intuitively know these things as you work through your practice, but it really helps to quantify how much time a process takes, because the better you get at it, the faster you think you get. And sometimes you just can't speed it up anymore, right? Sometimes the printer just takes the time it takes to print the paper out. There's no way to speed that up, and you got to wait. And so that part you got to figure out, okay, what all are the things we can do within that process to speed it up, because we know it's going to still take this amount of time. Like I said, you can go from super basic, which is where I would recommend start small and build on it, to crazy complicated, and that will happen sort of organically throughout the lifeblood of your practice.
Yeah, and as far as cost of these programs, I can't say specifically how much each one is. I know when I first started 10 years ago, Clio was about $64 a month, and it has steadily increased. This was Clio Manage, and then adding on Clio Grow was not as much as that. And so that's, I don't know, 20 or $30 per user for Clio Grow, I think is kind of what I was paying when I was on Clio Grow. And then Lawmatics is about $64 a month now too. It may be a little bit more than that at this point. $100 tops probably for one user is probably what you're thinking. You know, when I think that ten case rule is probably pretty good. If you can't manage it on an Excel spreadsheet, that's the time to move to a CRM of some kind. That's what my recommendation would be for folks.
Yeah. And I think just anecdotally, our brains can only process sort of what we can see on screen. So when you start having to scroll to see more of the screen and all the information that may be below, because it could be one item off the screen, or it could be 1,000 items, or you don't know, the brain doesn't know the difference. And so that's kind of the general thought is, as you're able to take all of these things and see them in more discrete buckets, that's super helpful for you to take action on them and go, okay, yeah, I see this here. And the beauty of the CRM tools is they have some design elements to help you filter and focus on those things that are here in the process versus here. Whereas an Excel spreadsheet, unless you build those filters in, you end up with a massive list of things to do. And your brain just has a hard time going, so where do I start? Is I need to know where's the end, and it just can increase that anxiety as you're kind of trying to manage everything that's going on. And so these tools are really helpful in that sense to organize it, give you a system that you don't have to create. The system is already built. Then you can just add on to and customize it to best fit your practice. And so pricing wise, again, as you get more users and things, the numbers roll up, and then you can get discounts through your state bar association or different places. So I can't tell you exactly what we pay for these now. I know the total numbers, but if you go to each provider's website, there will be a pricing page. And typically there's some sort of discount if you pay a year in advance, and you get maybe a month off or something like that, is I think how most of them price it. But the essentials would be Office 365 or Microsoft Office 365, and that's relatively inexpensive. I think, Thomas, you mentioned the domain name. Highly, highly recommend that to, again, give you that validity of, hey, this is your law firm domain, and you tie your email to that. So it comes from your name at yourlawfirm.com or whatever it is. And then again, thinking about that client information security, data security, Microsoft is pretty good about that. I think they're, very cognizant of that, but just be aware anytime you're moving that data to a cloud-based system like that, you understand how it works and if it's in compliance with your jurisdiction's rules and your underlying ethical responsibilities to your clients as well. And then that same analysis you would want to apply to any type of CRM tool that you want to use or software tool where you're going to house some kind of information relating to the representation, right? And so just be aware of how that works. To say nothing of AI, which we haven't even touched on yet. So we'll talk about that at some point, I'm sure, in this series of podcast episodes as we're going out. One thing I'm doing a lot of research on this year for CLE presentations is AI and how that's going to influence how we practice. How do we do so ethically and those kind of things, and leverage the tools that are available to us to benefit our practice and our clients in a safe way as well. I'm super excited about all that stuff because it's so neat to see what's capable. But the bottom line is it's got to help you serve your clients. And if it doesn't do that, you got to get rid of it, even if it's your baby. I've had a few of those over the years where like, this is the coolest thing. And it doesn't help serve the client. We got to get it out the door.
Yeah. Kind of in closing, I think this is kind of the best time to start a law practice in a lot of ways because there is such little barriers to entry, so few barriers to entry, I should say. In 2014, I was coming in, and I think that was like the last year of, not all the counties in Indiana were e-filing at that time, and pretty soon all the counties in Indiana were e-filing just within a year or two of my passing the bar. And so I didn't have to do a whole lot of paper filing and all of that. And this just is an example. It's a wonderful time to start a law practice because you're able to do so much with relatively inexpensive equipment and programs that you can purchase through subscriptions. I think that is a great discussion. I think a lot of content, we could probably go down some more rabbit holes if we wanted to, but I think we'll leave it at that. Beth, how about you highlight for us the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer website and where people can find us.
Hey, appreciate that, Thomas. So, yeah, this content obviously is meant to help other lawyers and clients too in terms of that educational piece. And so we're on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and search us out. We have the handle, if you will, at Lifetime Legacy Lawyers. The website will redirect over to the YouTube channel as well. There is an audio feed of the podcast as well. So if you want to pick that up in a podcast player of your choice, just search for Lifetime Legacy Lawyers, and that will come up in your podcast player as well. And so as we continue, Thomas, I appreciate your time and your thoughts on this. I think this is really helpful just to give different perspectives on it. So thanks so much for your time today. How can people find you?
Best way to reach me is by going to viclaw.org. How about you, Seth?
We are here at adlerattorneys, plural.com, adlerattorneys.com, and you can find our contact information right there on our website.
All right. We'll see you next time, Seth. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.